live. Gavin, thanks for agreeing to this chat. For those who don't know, you were the first person to come onto my podcast. And now, in terms of conversations recorded, I'm approaching 100. Like I'm in the high 90s now. So it's quite a...
Wow, that's cool.
It's quite a... You're like the bookend in a way. Cool. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, lekker. It's a privilege to be here again. I can't believe that you're on 100 almost. That's super cool. Happy to be a bookend. That's a new role. I'll take it. Just looking forward to this conversation and this context as well, and this platform, which is very comfortable in the virtual spaces for me. So looking forward to our conversation.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm less comfortable. This is my second recorded Zoom podcast. I've had many online meetings, but it somehow feels different. But let's see. So the intention, I think, of having this conversation is we're in unprecedented times, and I feel like I know within myself I'm struggling to make sense of it all and struggling to, I guess, stay grounded and not get carried away in the hype and the fear and all the stuff that's going on around us. And so the intention was to chat to you because I know a lot of what you do is around helping people live a more, well, you can probably phrase it better than I can, but live a more a life closer to who they're wanting to be. And I think that's harder in this time. I value your input on giving some people some advice on how we can travel through this time in a productive way to come out the other side, hopefully better in some way. Learning whatever needs to be learned during this time. So I don't know if you have any thoughts to kick us off, and then we can just go see where we go.
Yeah, well, I think the first thought that I actually have just listening to your intro is that I think we're in a space of magnifying and amplifying. And so whatever my internal landscape or how well I know myself, how comfortable I am within me and with people or the world around me, I think is magnified. It's amplified. So this space of sitting like on my own, reading a book, writing, having time on my hands that I'm not sure what to do with, how do I respond to that? And what occupies my mind and how do I navigate what comes in and out of my mind? And we were talking a couple of days ago and also just before we started the call about so maybe I'll just give a little bit of context of where I'm at. That might be quite useful and then pick it up from there. So I've been engaging with people directly with the coronavirus experience from right into early January because I've got people I work with in China and Singapore and Hong Kong and so on. And my first experiences were as a comfortable observer who was fascinated by what they were doing and how they were living, right? And so with very little impact directly to me. And then as it began to come closer, in fact, in February, I did a trip to South Africa and then returned to Israel where I'm now living. And in that space of going to South Africa and coming back, the escalation, the amplification of the coronavirus and how people were experiencing and living with it. And so I started noticing that in some ways the water's coming a little bit closer and higher. And most of the direct impact on me were quite minimal. In fact, in some ways, even opportunities that come up because I work virtually and the people I work with and the teams of coaches that work with me all pretty much operate virtually. And so very little disturbance. And in fact, in the early parts of this and still quite a high level of confirmation of my lifestyle and what I've chosen or built and been fortunate enough that being built with me or for me as well. So I do feel a lot of gratitude in this space as well. And then as the times increased or gotten closer to where we are now, more direct impacts from the markets in terms of, well, in the process of buying an apartment. So if you can think of the worst time to move money, this would be it. And so having a direct impact then on stress levels and financials and how to navigate this, and markets that are just absolutely crazy. And then, of course, working on like 20% workforce. So all of these things started coming together at a very intense move towards each other. And so what I've found for me is my stress levels got amplified and magnified in that space. And it really required or challenged me to, okay, so what do I have in my base and my foundation that's going to help me navigate this? And so that's what I've really been spending time thinking about and being with, because I think the truth is that no one knows where we're really going at the moment. I think there's some conversations about whether you want to call it conspiracy theories or when you want to call it very powerful leaders who sit in the background and operate things, or 5G or whatever. Those are all very interesting conversations, and who knows? The question is, if I don't know, how do I navigate? If I don't have direction, I don't have a compass and clarity, how do I navigate in uncharted, unknown waters? And so I think it brings me back to a few principles that maybe we can talk about. The first, which is fundamental, is attention. Where do I place my attention, and where does my attention come from, and to what? And that then feeds off into a number of behaviors and habits, which then occupy my space and my time. So if in our world right now, fear and panic and pain are magnified, what's equally magnified is gratitude, relief, joy, whatever. It depends on where we're at in that spectrum. And can I hold a range of all of those? Because that's the magnification of my life experience, or anyone's experience. So probably starting at quite a philosophical level in some way it sounds, but actually this has been quite a deep personal few days of journeying, because I'd also booked a week of holiday in South Africa, because this was my Ruby's bat mitzvah, is to what it would have been tomorrow. So instead of then kind of just carrying on with work, chose to be at home for a week with Justine and Ruby. And it's been a phenomenal week. Ruby and I just did a really intense 20-minute workout, and it was amazing to do that with her. So I'll pause there. I think I'm really interested in attention, where it goes, and what are some of the fundamentals that enable me to sharpen or to blunt my attention, and what forces around me are trying to blunt my attention, and how do I cope and navigate and manage those when they come from lots of different people and contexts that we are in contact with. So I think it's a fascinating time. It's a scary time. It's a liberating time. It's an exciting time. And it's super, super unknown, which brings up immediate fear for anyone. If we don't know where we're going, it's important for us to acknowledge the fear. If I don't acknowledge that I'm afraid, I get immobilized by denying it. So I've found that acknowledging it has actually given me a good sense of focus, actually, and navigating it as a result. So it feels like I've started with a bit of soliloquy. So I'll pause there and check where that's taking us and what your thoughts are.
I like the attention piece. I've noticed my attention, and it's taken time for me to pull it back, because I just watching my own journey through this. Initially, I panicked, I had fear, and I wanted to know what was going on. So it was much easier for me to get distracted by, like, I'm sure everybody's WhatsApp groups have just gone off the chart busy. And I slowly started silencing, ignoring, asking people to, like, look, please don't post this anymore. I'm not interested, because I just got to a saturation point and an overwhelm point which was just absolutely not useful to me anymore. And realizing that, like I did when life was normal, realized how too much attention on social media was not good for me, because a lot of it is fear-based. A lot of the news and stuff we're seeing out there normally is fear-based, and as you said, now it's heightened and
Mm.
amplified.
Yeah.
So I've slowly got to that place within myself now, like, okay, I can't keep consuming all this media. It's not helpful. It's not helping me.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I've seen that within myself, that
Mm.
but it's taken time, and I think, like, I've also had to be gentle on myself to,
Mm.
um, I've seen a few pieces and a few people speak about grief, grief for the loss of what we thought was going to happen next week, next month, for the rest of the year, because we now don't know, and there's
Mm.
a loss within that.
Mm.
And so yeah, I'm having to pull back my attention and start thinking about what I want out of this time, and
Mm.
um, what I want out of my life. I'm not in a fortunate place where financially I can just stop and take a holiday like some people are.
Mm.
Like, I have to try and hustle and see how I can make money in this time, which is tricky. I wish I had more time, but it still is giving me more time because I'm not traveling anywhere. The
Mm.
kids aren't going to school. There is space. There is more space, I think. Um, yeah. So
Mm.
I'll pause there, I think.
Mm. Well, there's a couple of things that I think are really interesting in that, and kind of the first one is around if in our normal day to day, going back a few weeks, let's say, the intensity and the speed and the pace at which we were living allowed and discouraged and didn't really allow or didn't encourage us to kind of focus on recovery, quality time with ourselves, quality time with our family, meditation, journaling, reading, creation. It was very much consume, be passive, take on. And the busier you are, the more pressurized you are, somehow the more successful you are. This is the ongoing kind of narrative of our culture. And, working with leaders over time, this is something that it's a very sneaky shadow that keeps being there in the distance of what does success actually look like. And one of my clients not so long ago said, I've been chasing this for so long that it's exhausted me, and I've realized that this is not what I want to be chasing. But I've bought into being this person in the organization that people come to when they need to deliver, when there's a big project, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like the high achiever who's exhausted because they're just being pushed to the brink. And the organization or the father or the mother, whoever that's just programmed that, is always in the engine room. And I'm never stopping to thinking about who's driving this thing and where am I going, why am I driving? So what I think is quite exciting and nerve-wracking for a lot of us, including myself, although for me a bit less maybe because I feel that my life focus has become more on recovery, and then to expend energy, it's to get the balance right. And so what our world is doing at a global level, if you will, and what we're doing individually and locally in smaller spaces is we don't know how to recover. We don't encourage, and we don't honor, and we don't give any real credence to the value of recovery. Very little. And so what our context is forcing on us now is to learn ways to recover, to replenish, to retreat. I mean, if you had gone to sleep or were in a coma a few weeks ago and you woke up and people told you that world travel would have stopped, no sporting events, not two people won't be playing sport together pretty much anywhere in the world, right? There's none of this UEFA Cup and, the Olympics is going to be cancelled. It's like, no one would have believed that. And so in some ways we're being forced, as uncomfortable as it can be and often is. And I think I want to say this early on, I'm by no means anywhere near the discomfort that people are in the form of survival and the pain of when they're living day to day, where's that coming from? And I sit with a lot of that discomfort in myself because in some ways, not guilt, but like there's a pain in so many millions of people around the world that are desperate right now and going to become more desperate. I don't sit in that space. It's important to I do recognize that I have that privilege. But on a kind of broader macro level, we are being forced and being given opportunities to rethink the way we live, the way we think, the way we act, the way we are. And out of that always comes opportunity and change and advance, and new ways of formulating relationship, connection, society, community. And those are very exciting elements. Our fundamental infrastructures are being forced to change. Whether, again, if we leave aside for a moment, there's some powerful people trying to make that happen. There's a good argument for that, not even a conspiracy argument, let's say, but let's say there's argument to that. But even if you leave that aside and we don't know where we're going, some of the positives that are emerging out of this, in terms of the quality of connection between friends, family members, and even strangers, I think is incredibly heartwarming and incredibly energizing. That, I guess, through any change, there's always going to be pain and discomfort. And can I, as an individual, sit with that and be a positive contributor that enables this change? Or am I going to fall into the fear and the panic that news and media and a lot of leaders actually are also creating? Like, we don't have a global leader at the moment that's galvanizing global response at a mature leader level. We have a very junior, infantile, leaders, and one in particular, which is no need to go into what I agree or disagree with Donald Trump, but I think just to simply say he's not showing up as a leader who cares about the world and how do we get through this, and I'm going to be part of that. It's more about I'm taking care of me and my own.
Well,
and
not
that's
even.
his agenda.
And
not even, exactly. But I don't want to go down the Trump rabbit hole because that could derail us. But simply more to state it from a vacuum of leadership that our world has right now in terms of appointed leaders. And I think that's an exciting element because perhaps and hopefully through this, unappointed local and then more regional leaders might come out through this over time as well. And we don't know. I think the bottom line is that we just really don't know. And so going back to what can I do for myself and what can maybe others do, I think it's to really limit. And I think what you said is like knocking down the WhatsApp chats, limiting what we read, and being quite discerning. I think what goes with attention is discernment and choice, and then that needs to have a foundation of practical day-to-day things that I'm doing every single day. Hopefully, I've been doing them for a while, so that foundation, when it got shaken, and everyone's will have gotten shaken in the last while, but how quickly do I recover? Is it like a tall building in the wind that's built on a foundation that adjusts to the environment? Or is it built on such weak foundations that as soon as there's some kind of tremor, its foundations fall over and it starts stealing the toilet paper from the person who had it and fighting with them because it's about me, using a small example, but it tells us something about the psyche of us as people. And so I think coming back to stripping down minimalistic ways of being in the world is a very powerful way of engaging with us. So for me, as an example, my routine hasn't changed in any real way, even on my holiday, so-called in this week, and back into work next week. I wake up at the same time. I still do my morning kind of practices. I still continue my day when I'm working with the same breaks that I have. And then my time with my family is slightly different, but we're spending more time together and it's quality time, which in the running around, like for example, Ruby has 6 nights a week or 6 nights or 5 nights a week. Or afternoon, she's got, this extramural and that extramural. So now she doesn't have any of it. And so although it's extreme on the other side, the quality of time that we're spending and the fact that we're not rushing here and there means that I really see the quality of our relationship deepening, which is an incredible gift. And again, it's a privileged gift because I'm not sitting worrying about how I'm going to feed Ruby tomorrow. But that's my reality. So in my space, what can I do to pay attention to the right things, strip it down to the simple things that support my foundation and keep me nourished and nurtured and energized, and give attention to the right things, and then strip out a lot of the extra videos that people are sending and the articles and so on, and just be able to like choose, what am I going to read? What am I going to watch? And how am I going to switch off totally? I think that's also really important. How am I going to actually just not be on my phone and not be on my social media and not just watch stuff related to coronavirus? I mean, I've been on a media diet for many years where I basically just don't follow the news. I get it through people I trust, or I get bite sizes. And so even now, I don't know the stats anymore. I started at the beginning and I was like, who knows how accurate they are, blah, blah. Bottom line is, all they were doing was creating anxiety for me. So why follow them? It's out of my control. So follow what's useful and necessary. Each individual will determine that for themselves. But we all know when we're going more than that and over the top, if we really just tune in and pay attention. So again, comes back to paying attention and being willing to be uncomfortable, to sit and be uncomfortable with not knowing where I'm going, where the world is going, and ask tough questions. But tough questions provide beautiful answers, which require change in all of us. So
I'd like to jump in here if I can, and just get even more practical for people who are going to watch this. So you've been meditating for 20 years or something to that effect, and I've been meditating for a while as well. And in terms of attention, for those people who don't have a regular meditation practice, it's a tool that allows you to, from one of the things it gives you is the ability to discern where your attention is on a quicker, on a more, it feels like you have more control over what your mind's doing. So what are some of the other benefits, particularly at this time, that you feel that a practice like meditation can bring to people?
Yeah, I think a very key point is the crossroad of choice to, am I willing to sit with whatever comes up and ride it out as it ebbs and flows, or do I want to meditate to get rid of something and replace it with something else? I think that crossroad is a very important one, or that point in the journey is important. If I want to meditate to replace something with something else, I'm already starting a hike, let's say, with 5 kilograms of rocks on my back. So rather starting it with a sense of, I'm wanting to learn more about myself and how to cope and build muscles around dealing with myself and my interface with life, or my life at the moment. If that's more of a choice, or if I come in with that intention, I'm much more likely to, whatever my meditation practice, get more benefit and build muscle. If we take a parallel analogy, if I go into exercise and fitness because I buy into the cultural norms of a woman or a man has to look a certain way, or weigh a certain amount, or whatever, it's a physical thing, right? I'll get certain benefit to a point, but I'm probably not going to ride it out when it gets really uncomfortable. I'll probably give it up. Or I'll do it for a few months and then I'll look the way I want, and then I'll stop because I've been repressing and suppressing desires and needs that I have. Well, not needs, but desires. So in the same way, if I go into fitness and health because I want to be healthy and fit and live a vibrant life, then I'm going to do it from an intention of, well, the discomfort is part of it when I'm building my muscles, but I'm not doing it to look a certain way. I'm doing it to experience life from a mindset and a feeling space, an emotional space that enables me to deal with life in a more, let's say, equilibrium kind of mindset or way. And so for me, that's what meditation offers in a very simple, practical way. So am I willing to sit with the fact that, like I gave my example at the beginning, of the market suddenly dropping, and I mean, for me, $15,000 just went, totally disappeared. And I had to find a way to A, bring that money somehow, and then B, sit with a feeling of like, literally I don't know if your heart actually drops, but that's what it felt like, into my stomach, and the feeling, the fire, the burning, the the sensations. And so what I did as soon as I saw that, as I went and I lay on my bed for 10 minutes and I did nothing else but sit lying down, observing my body on fire. And that enabled me to then galvanize my strength to say, okay, what am I going to do about it? Normally or previously, I might have sat and tried to figure out in my head, but I'm in some ways in some form of shock. And so I'm not thinking clearly then. And if I try and act then, I'm going to be going from panic. So I think that comes off the base of building simple little practices into our day. And anyone can start wherever they're at. So clients of mine actually just emailed me yesterday. And she's, without going into too much detail, very senior leader, navigating 2 different roles, moving into a new role, and under enormous stress. And I sent her one of my blogs that I'd done around breathing as an exercise and how you can implement it in your day. And it's like, 5 or 6 simple points there. And just taking one of them away was what I encouraged her to do, and try that. And just that act alone of choosing for 5 minutes a day to be with her breath and observe it physically in her body without trying to change what her mind was doing, but bringing it back to the physical movement of the breath in and out, was a profound experience for which she did on her own. And so I think there's a huge amount of material out there in a range. Some of it's really good, some of it's maybe less good, but if our intention is the right intention, we will find the right resources, we'll reach out to the right people, and then find the form of meditation that meets you where you're at now, and then be willing to practice it, be willing to do it every single day, 5 minutes a day if that's what you want to do, twice a day, once a day, and build it up to a place that supports you. When you see value, you'll build more into it, and that will profoundly impact our leadership, the way we engage with ourselves and the way we engage with others. So I think there's lots of practical little things that we can do. Do you start your day by putting your phone on and checking your Facebook and your news feed straight away to see what the latest results of the coronavirus are? Or do you start your day as you get out of bed and do a short meditation, take a journal out and write, or make a cup of tea and sit quietly? What is your first choice? Because that first choice sets the next choice and the next choice. And that first action also sets the next action for your day. So the more, like I know for myself, I operate best within structure and fluidity within that. If I have too much fluidity, then I struggle. But if I have the right level of structure, my fluidity works brilliantly. So for me, my day starts and ends pretty much with a meditation, with running, and a few other things that I do along my day. And each person will find whatever theirs are. It might be painting. It might be sitting outside in your garden if you're fortunate to have one at the moment. So there are lots of little things I think we can do. It always comes back to, am I willing to pay attention to the discomfort that's inside of me and around me, and be with that enough that I can start building muscle to be with it, which then opens up a whole other rooms of different feelings and emotions that I might have numbed out during this accelerated, fast-paced, crazy last few years that we've been living in this world. Because when we numb one feeling, we numb all feeling. So if I don't like being anxious and I don't want to feel like incredibly angry, and I drink a lot of coffee and I work really hard, then I might numb anxiety and anger, but I will also numb joy and gratitude and love. So I don't have a choice which emotions I numb. As soon as I start numbing, I numb. And so am I courageous enough to pay attention to the whole range of emotions that will start bubbling up? And the first ones will probably be more uncomfortable than comfortable. So gratitude is not going to pop up and go, thank you for stopping for 5 seconds. Anxiety will pop up first probably, or anger or whatever. So I think there's a real willingness that we need to have, I want to have, to build muscle. And then I can experience the range of emotions, mindsets, and all the other pieces that come with building a conscious life in very, very unsteady, uncertain times. But I think that's what is being asked of each one of us at the moment.
So I'm just cognizant of the fact that a lot of people, and myself included, one of the things I struggle with is so one of the things I want to do is I want to draw every day, but I don't. I want to, like, there's things that I want to do every day that I know are good for me, that I know that I want, but there's a piece missing in maybe it's the reason why I'm getting into it, like you alluded to before, or I think it's a stumbling block for a lot of people is getting into that rhythm. We know what's good for us, whether it's eating habits or exercise or whatever. Do you have any like ideas or thoughts on how people can get into a rhythm and then stay in that rhythm with whatever that little thing is that they're doing?
Yeah, look, I think at the base of that is habits, right? So it's habits of emotion, habits of mind, habits of physical action. And behind our habits sits why we do things. And why we do things comes from very early age for most of us. And so I think one of the most simple, powerful ways of doing that is, we were talking, I think, briefly about this as well, is, what is the story that I live every moment of every day? What is my story? I think most people are not really, we're not aware of the story that we're living into. Most of it's been narrated to us and for us and scripted, and we live into this. So for example, if I want to be healthy and vibrant and strong physically, but from an early age, I've been programmed to believe that a body needs to look a certain way, and that I'm not good enough unless I do A, B, and C. And these messages have been coming to me from a very young age. And then they keep, let's say the mother disappears, but she gets replaced by a teacher. And then it gets replaced by a boyfriend or a husband or whatever. And we're attracting that same behavior from someone else. If I'm not at some point going, okay, what's the story that I'm living today? And what's the story that I actually want to live into? And starting to craft that story, I think, is a critical, practical thing that every person can do. So I'll give you a really amazing example recently that's been mind-blowing for me to be part of in building this out. So the principle is going back to attention and discomfort. Am I willing to ask myself some questions around what's the story I'm really living? If I was watching Gavin living his life, how would I describe him as a character in a movie? How does he behave? How does he think? How does he look? How does he walk? How does he engage with people? Does he make eye contact or doesn't he? What happens to his tone of voice? All of these little intricacies that build a character. If you think of someone like Daniel Day-Lewis, who will live a character for months before he plays that character, am I willing to begin to get to know the Daniel Day-Lewis in me from day one and work for weeks, days, weeks, months to start getting to know that character better, and then write a new story for the character? And that new story comes from, well, where does Gavin want to be in 5 or 10 years' time? What is important to him? So what are my values? And top 5, 7 values. And what is the purpose that I think I'm here for in this world? And it can be a variety. It doesn't have to be changing the world dramatically and being the leader of a country. It can be contributing to people that I love and a society around. Whatever is important to me and my values becomes my purpose, and I can actually narrate that and write a new story. So just to give an example about how people can work with this, I'm working with a woman at the moment who lives and works in a culture. So she's in a context where women, let's say, are not really given much power or seen, that they have to really defer to men. And it's a very patriarchal context she finds herself in, an incredibly bright young woman. And she lost her brother he was at a young age, and she feels it was her fault. And in one of our first conversations, we built out the character that she's been living. She's been highly effective in her work, blocking out many relationships around her and living through her work because she's sitting with a lot of trauma actually from her guilt around her brother, and also the patriarchy that she lives in, so she can't elevate herself because that's not respectful, etc. So we built a phrase around her old story that she was constantly living. And the old phrase, if I remember correctly, was something around an insecure little girl or something like that. It wasn't exactly that. But what we then did is say, okay, write the story of how she lives her day. How does she think? How does she move? How does she behave? How does she breathe? How does she focus? What does she do? What motivates her? Why does she get motivated by that, etc.? And as we unpacked that, she got a much clearer sense of who she's living into, which comes from her past. So she's living her past every single day in the present and into the future. In the Same time, in parallel, we started creating a new story for her. It happened to be a very powerful piece because I said to her one day, what would it be like to live as an attuned, so like from attention, attuned lioness? And the lioness happens to be, she's a Libra. So for her, it was quite a powerful sign. So we started then building in parallel a new narrative, which is, what would it be like to live your life as an attuned lioness? And so over the course of a couple of conversations, and more importantly, over the course of her doing the work between our conversations, she developed a lot more clarity and nuance and subtlety around how does the insecure little girl live in the world, and how does the attuned lioness start living and want to live in the world. We're now into 6-7 months of working together, probably 3 months or so of this narrative. She's a fundamentally different person. And put me aside for a moment. I've played a role, that's fine. I honor that role. But it's been mostly her finding her voice, who she is, and how she wants to be in the world as an attuned lioness, to the point that the GM of the business that she works in, she's in an HR role, now looks to her when he makes decisions. And when you talk about the coronavirus, HR is a fundamental partner in most organizations. How do we navigate this? She has become the leader of the ship in many ways. And that's just one example amongst the others where, family connections and relationships with herself. She spends time every evening journaling, in the morning meditating, praying in her context as well. So that's just it's an example of a person, but it's a very simple example of, if I'm prepared to be uncomfortable, but also I think what goes with discomfort is the willingness to be free and liberated. Because if I'm willing to be free and liberated, I have to accept, there's no way around being uncomfortable, uneasy, and uncertain in that process. But if I'm committed enough to being free and liberated, then coming back to your question of, will I get up at 5 a.m. to do my meditation? Well, how committed are you to your why and where you want to go and your purpose, and being more liberated than living somebody else's life and story for you? Because guess what? If I'm not living it, somebody else will be happy to make me live it, especially if I'm in a corporate context and I'm a leader who's doing well for the business. There are plenty of people who want me to lead in certain ways. So I think there's a lot of simple little choices in that, but it always comes back to the seed. And the seed is, what am I really here to do? What are my values? And what are the habits and behaviors that on a daily basis I don't want to, and I'm not willing to compromise anymore because I've compromised them for too long. And it takes courage, and it takes a willingness to do that. And so, and then maybe just a final thing, just before you come in, I think the self-compassion part, for the multiple times where I don't get that right and other people don't get that right, that's an equally important part, because the inner critic is very strong in most of us, particularly in the Western culture. Can I develop enough compassion for myself to support myself and balance the imbalance of the inner critic with self-compassion and a self-supporter, and grow that muscle, so that when I fall off the bike, I will get back up, rather than I fall off the bike and now beat myself up for falling off the bike, and I'm, call myself names and, beat the shit out of myself for that. So I think that's a very important other part that goes with this as well.
I really like that, because I feel like, and this is my perception and judgment of many people in the world, is that a lot of people are living a life that they don't want to live, and are in jobs that they don't want to be in, and doing things, and there's been this, it feels like a collective feeling like we're trapped in this world and this society and this rat race that we all want to get out of somehow. And I've seen a lot of speak around this now. This is an opportunity to think about, what else could we do? What does that other thing look like? And I really like bringing it back to our own personal story. I'm going to do this exercise that you suggested. I really like it. Like rewriting our story. Like, now's the time to do that, because we've got the space to do it. Some of us have got the space to do it.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that discomfort, we're going to feel the discomfort anyway, whether we change or we don't change. That's the other thing.
Totally.
It's part of human existence. We can't escape it.
Well, I think we're going to feel it more intensely because it's unconscious, and we push it to the unconscious. So why don't we sleep well at night? I know when I'm stressed, we were talking about this the other day. One of my symptoms, as you were sharing as well, is when I'm really stressed, I don't sleep well. So that's something in my psyche, in me, that's uncomfortable, and it's waking me up to work through something. And what I've learned over time, fortunately, is that when I wake up like that, I'm able to lie in bed for sometimes a couple of hours, being with that discomfort. So the very important part that I think you've just said, and I think it's just really good to magnify, is that we are going to be uneasy, even more so if we are denying or hiding or pushing away the truth of, or the knowledge of, that I'm not quite where I want to be, or being who I want to be, and I'm living somebody else's story or somebody else's life. And so, again, do I have enough courage just in this moment to start changing the direction and the trajectory of my life by starting to look inside? And then when I fall off, do I have enough compassion just in this moment? And then as I build that moment to moment, the muscle that was now at 1%, a week or 2 or 3 weeks later is at 5%. And at 5%, it gets to 10%. So if I could only do 2 push-ups today, but I can do 3 tomorrow, that's incredible progress. If I can do 30 in a week's time or 2 weeks' time, that's incredible progress. The emotional, mental muscles work in exactly the same way as the physical muscles, right? In terms of practice, we need to practice these things. So going back to the story, I think what's also important to add in, and you don't need a long time to do this. If I'm really willing to be honest with myself, I can take half an hour or an hour and sit down and write, right, how does Gavin live his life? Be really honest with myself, okay? How do I wake up in the morning? How do I think? How do I behave? What do I do? What are my good habits? What are my not good habits? What do I want to get rid of? What do I not want to get rid of? Where are my strengths? And write that out. And then write that for the future me. And behind that is, where do I want to be in 10 years' time, which is what we were talking about the other day as well. Gavin wakes up in 2030, and Gavin's at the most fulfilled, happy, best him he can possibly be. And as you were saying to me, which I really loved, the detail of going from the moment I wake up to every moment of that day and describing what that day would be like in my life, that will give me a microscopic experience of every day in that 10-year future. And then my work is to bring it back and start building the day-to-day mini goals, practices, habits that will build me into that short-term 3-month, 6-month, 1 year, etc. And what's important here, which I think is fundamentally important, is that these are practices, habits, and rituals and behaviors that, regardless of what's happening around me in the world, will help me navigate the world better than anything else if I don't do them. So the fact that the stock market is doing what it is, the fact that I can't work, whatever, if I have a practice or I don't have a practice, I'm much more likely to navigate it more effectively if I have a practice, whatever that practice or practices are, versus not having them. So coffee is not a practice. Drinking at night to like numb my day. Okay, we do that, whatever, but it's not a practice. It's an unconscious, just like diluting or numbing out of pain and discomfort of my day. And I've earned the right to drink or to watch Netflix. That's fine if that's what you need to do from time to time, or I need to do. But then that becomes a passive consumption of somebody else's creation versus my creation of my day, my life, how I want to be. No, I'm not going to sit on the couch and watch Netflix this afternoon or this evening. I'm going to do 20 push-ups, or I'm going to go for a walk around the block, or spend time with my daughter, or whatever. So these choices seem like small choices in the moment, but when they link back to the why and the big purpose and the story, then that's what makes the change. It's not these significant, fundamental, I'm suddenly enlightened things. I don't really think that happens for many people. I think for most people, you might have an aha moment, but what actually makes the change is then the small little chipping away day to day. And so I would say anyone who's listening to this and getting hopefully some value would walk away from this and say, right, what are my 5 strengths that I have? What are the 5 areas that are not working for me? What are the 5 habits that really benefit me in my day and energize me and make me good and closer to and aligned to this vision we're talking about? Do that first, I would say, and then map it. How are my habits mapping to the vision of who I want to be? And then what are the 5 habits that are getting in the way? Choose one that you're going to amplify and strengthen and grow. Choose one that you're going to minimize and shorten and do less of. And then slowly but surely, you'll drop the one off your list and you'll add another onto your list. And that's how we do. We switch habits, or we double up on a habit. A good habit, double up on something. And a bad habit or habits that's not working, take it away, double that as well. These are all very simple things that we can do. And that's, I think most people don't change because it seems so simple and so consistent. What makes it simple is the consistency. And we're not built to be consistent in our culture. Our culture says, new, do this, do that. What's sexy today? No, what's sexy years ago and what should always be sexy is being consistent and doing things in a repetitive way. And then you will see change and growth over time. I think that's much sexier than most other things which are fads or that don't last. It's like being consistent. It's not sexy, but it gives the results of what you're looking for if you want to be. I mean, probably not the best analogy I've used, but I think consistency and, that discipline comes from a place of clarity. And am I willing to slow down enough to go deep into what will give me clarity, or am I going to be driven by the lack of direction and the noise that's in our culture, in our system? Even more so, it's magnified and heightened now. So do I tune into it, or do, as you were saying, unplug, limit, and then choose where I funnel my energy? That's the questions I think are important to be asking right now.
I think the other piece, and you have kind of alluded to it within the conversation, is the important people in my life, and like spending time with my kids it's so grounding, and it's definitely in alignment with who I want to be as a good father and loving them in the best way I can. But I have days where I know that I'm busy and I'm stressed, and I kind of devalue those things for that moment. And I think a lot of people live their lives wanting to be better fathers or mothers or parents or husbands or wives or brothers or sisters. But I think relationships, for me, form such a big part of our lives, and wanting, and I mean, everyone says it, like when you die, those are the things you remember, like those relationships and those people in your life are like cornerstones to, again, in a crazy time like this, that's been my biggest comfort is my family.
Yeah.
And prioritizing that.
Yeah, and I think that, so firstly, if you look at relationships rippling out, so my relationship with myself is the fundamental driver to the quality of the relationships that I have with the people around me. So the more I'm willing to be in relationship with myself, which for me includes being more anxious than I want to admit sometimes, or being more uncomfortable, or sitting with the fact that I'm feeling vulnerable and don't want to share that because I struggle to share my vulnerability. I'm much more comfortable when I'm supporting someone else. That's my default, right? So all of these elements in myself, the more in relationship I can be with myself and accept those parts of me and grow them in a way that's healthy, and then build the parts of me that I love and that I think are great and share those with others, and the vulnerabilities. The more comfortable I'm in that relationship, the more comfortable I'm going to be. Take that first ripple, Justine for me and Ruby. And then from that, my parents, etc., friends. So that relational dimension is being amplified and magnified for us right now as well, right? So how alone and lonely am I in this world versus how connected and willing am I to reach out if I'm feeling alone or lonely? And I think that's another barometer. And I think one of the beautiful things that is being amplified in our world right now is the sense of community, local, friendship, family, and the beautiful things like Justine's sister the other day, Zoom call, Justine's brothers in England, they're in Jerusalem, we're in another part of Israel, and then Justine's parents are in South Africa. So like there's a Zoom call and everyone's on it. We haven't done that before. So I think finding new ways to be in connection, but the amplification of connection and the fundamental need that we have as human beings, as animals, I think as well, most other beings, is to be in connection. And in some ways, this is amplifying disconnection by you can't be with people, you can't play sport, you can't congregate in business, in spirituality, and whatever. And yet, can you find still, or do you still prioritize these relationships and find other ways to do that? So I'm speaking to my parents more than I usually do, to my friends more than I usually do, to my family. Obviously they hear more, I'm with them. And then my client conversations and my colleague conversations are happening at a level that we've been yearning to have. It's a vulnerable, real, honest, tough yet liberating space to be. When I get onto a call with a senior leader in an organization and they say that they're really scared, and they can acknowledge it because the coronavirus context has allowed us to speak about fear in a healthy way, right? Like it's a normal human feeling versus a fear that is culturally used against us as human beings to consume and to buy and to get away from ourselves. The quality of being able to move towards fear opens up a passageway to all sorts of other emotions, which is love and vulnerability and joy, and all the magic that comes with actually acknowledging fear, courage, and others. So I think that relational spectrum that we are being forced and encouraged to engage in is beautiful, and hard because it's being forced in some way, and some parts are taken away. But then again, it encourages us to go deeper in me as Gavin, deeper in me with my family, deeper in me with others. And again, that gets magnified and amplified. And so the quality of my relationships get reflected very clearly back to me. Who reaches out? Who do I reach out to? And what's the quality, depth, and level of those relationships? And each one of us sits with that reality. And in some ways, at death, I guess that's what happens. So we know we're near death, let's say, most of us, right? But we have a sense of what it's like to be on the journey of not having what we want, being alone, all of these other pieces that might come with death, or at least a death of, if I don't have a quality relationship with myself, there's some death in that, or there's life in that, depending on where I am in that spectrum. So I think that relational channel and field, there's a lot of potential and possibility now in that space. And I think that's really encouraging as well.
I'd like to, there's like a final thought that I'd like to talk about. And you ended off saying, using the words possibility, and I've seen a lot of people speak about this as well. It feels like there's like people are waking up to the fact that, okay, we're in this place now. The world that we were living in wasn't working for us, but we didn't know how to get out of it. And this is the opportunity to shift. But I feel like there's also a lot of wishful thinking in it, in that this situation is just going to magically change the world, and we're going to come out of it, and it's going to just be something different that we want. And I feel like there's a lot of hard work to be done between now and getting to that place. This is the moment to realize, okay, this is what we want. And then there's the work to get to wherever that is, which I don't know what that looks like and how we do that as a collective. But I just feel like it needs to be spoken, that this is not a magic fix that's going to just suddenly change everything.
Yeah. I mean, it would be great if that happened. It's highly unlikely. I think some changes will happen, positive and negative regardless, right? That's just the way things are. But I think if you take an example of a life event, right? Let's say I lose a loved one, right? In anyone's context, losing a loved one is one of the hardest things to navigate. How do I as an individual navigate that loss? Often people will have that as an awakening, a spiritual awakening or reconnection to something, whether that's their religious practice that they've maybe shunned or that hasn't connected to them, or maybe it's a new way of practice or whatever. But so loss often at a deep, like grieving kind of losing level wakes us up to reality. And sometimes you'll find people say, right, changing my job and I'm writing that book or whatever. I mean, whatever example you want to use. But there's a fundamental shock and then there's a change. The work that's required in order to kind of continue that change takes a lot of work and effort on the individual level. And then on the local level or community level, then on the local level, regional level, etc. And I think there are multiple layers to this for us to contribute to or to distance from or be neutral in. So like anything, I guess it does always come back to the individual, and small groups of people have the opportunity to change things fundamentally. So I think the question in that is, am I going to be an active participant in creating the world that I want to be part of in my little world and in my local community, etc.? Or am I going to let that be driven by others? And I think a lot of us it will be driven by what happens around us. Sometimes that's circumstantial and I don't, maybe I'm just surviving and so that's all I can do. But for any of us who have a bit more resources and a bit more capability and a bit more network and a bit more leverage and possibility in that space, I think that's one of the questions that we're being asked. I feel like I'm being asked that as well. So what in my life do I want to keep and build on and reinforce and leverage? And what in my life do I actually want to let go of? And so I'll give you an example for me personally. So for a number of years now, I've been working more and more virtually. And so I have found that I've got more and more space and time in my day to engage with my business in a different way. And part of what's been happening for me is that when I have those spaces in my day where I now am writing a bit, or I'll have like a gap where I'll have some lunch with Ruby, or sometimes start my day differently or go for a run or whatever, the guilt that's been there all the time of like somehow I'm not being productive or effective, or I should be doing more, or I'm tricking the system, all of these assumptions that I have and I think others might have in that same context have been slowly being replaced over time, but it's taken a lot of hard work. One of the things that I'm so grateful for through this experience is I feel like the world has slowed down to a place where my level of pace and virtual work that I do is somehow matching it a bit better. Because a lot of the people that I work with are running at a pace that I could not keep up with and I don't want to keep up with. But that's why my role is so effective for them, because I come in at a different pace and I can hold space for them. What's changing for me is that I'm now seeing that the spaces around that are being valued more and more deeply by me. The fact that I do have space between calls, like I don't do back-to-back calls. Very rarely I have to because of people's schedules, but I typically build in at least 15 minutes, but most of my calls, half an hour between them, because I'm not enough quality for the next person if I don't have that space to decompress and then prepare. And so what this has given me is saying that practice that I've been doubting or thinking I should fit more into my day or not being, it's like, no, that's exactly what makes me effective and good at what I do. And I think each of us can find those little pieces in our day or in our rhythm and our pace of life to say, I'm keeping that, I'm building that, I'm leveraging that, I'm letting go of that, I'm not doing that anymore. And maybe for some people is, you know what, the news, if I really watch it carefully, it just creates anxiety and tension and makes me feel worse. And I don't feel like I can do anything about it. That's how the media is designed. It's designed to create fear and disempowerment. Do I really want that in my day? Do I want to start my day with that? Do I want to spend an hour at night watching CNN or whatever it might be? No. Okay, great. Let me replace that. Let me write. Let me read a bedtime story to my daughter because I thought I didn't have time because I had to follow the world events. Well, there are other ways to do that. So going back to habits, I think that's really what it comes back to. Is what are the habits I want to carry forward? What are the platforms I want to build? And how do I recreate what's working at a better level and then take out and strip away and become much more discerning and minimalistic in what doesn't work and then be willing to just cut that out. And so for me, the one example I just gave is just cut out that feeling of like, somehow I'm not being productive enough. I am. I'm being very productive and effective. And I can do other things in my day, like cook for my family sometimes for dinner in my day, because I can. I've got an hour break for lunch. Why not do that? Instead of, oh, I better catch up and do another quick email because then I feel better about myself and I'm more productive. Whose story is that? It's a mechanistic industrial world story. We're not living in that world anymore. This is a digital world. So in the digital world, what I prefer to believe well, I work remotely, I can do that for my family. What a gift. And so that's a new belief, even as we speak, that's emerging for me. Let me go and write that up in my new story and go and live into that. It's going to be much better for me. And if it's better for me, it's better for others.
Hmm. I'd just like to touch on something you said there, which I think is also important and valuable, is that story is something that evolves. Because you just said, I'm going to go write that up in my story. It's a constant evolution. But I think that the other thing that I'd like to, and you did speak about it earlier, is just emphasize here, because it's something that I'm finding in this time has been useful for me as well, is gentleness with myself. And you used the word compassion earlier. And I feel like we need it more in the world too, because of everything's running so hard and we're at such a hectic pace and pushing ourselves and achievement and more, better. It's look where it's got us at the end of the day. I mean, it's got us somewhere, but it's in many ways it's not a good place. So I feel like more compassion and more the gentle side needs to kind of frame all of this too.
Yeah, I want to add two things onto that. I think the first is that whenever we have a strength and we overuse it, it becomes part of our weakness. And I think our world has got into overusing certain strengths in our culture and our society. And one of the gifts, hopefully, out of this is that we'll come back to a better balance of using our strengths more effectively and taking those as a culture or as an infrastructure and using those better. And then the other part, which is around the compassion, is I think what compassion requires of me is to acknowledge and accept and live into the fact that I'm fragile and I'm vulnerable as a human being. Every single one of us, every being is, but I mean, let's talk about just human beings, right? So if that is true, and I'm willing to step into that room, compassion or self-compassion, the more, like if I tiptoe into that room and then run out, I've made progress. If I then tiptoe a bit more the next day and the next day and the next day, that grows my self-compassion and enables me to be with the fragility and the vulnerability of being human. That creates humility. And I know for me, I still feel like I've got a long way to go in being more like humble, right? So stepping into that space, self-compassion allows the gentleness, as you were saying, to actually be okay with, I don't know what the hell's going on in the world. I'm really scared of what the impact might be on me and my family and my friends and my community. Equally, I'm willing to make an effort to make myself and the world better off. And so that compassion can also be used in a very strong force. Gentleness can be used very powerfully as long as it's recognized. So it's like the gentleness to a kid that's like just been hurt by a ball. They're playing a sport. Say, wow, I can see you're really hurt. But you know what? Your team also needs you right now. So how about you take 10 seconds out and then you get back in the game? Because if you don't get back in the game, you might have been falling off the gentleness to a victim. So there's a really fine balance, I think, in that. And each one of us needs to find our space in how do I know when I'm being compassionate at the right level and when I'm falling a little bit too far in the compassion to actually feel sorry for myself, right? And that's also, it's a practice. So stepping into that room, being willing to go in and out of there, I think is another practice. And self-compassion in itself, I think, is another conversation maybe. So we'll just pause on that part.
Yeah, sure. This has been a very full conversation. I think there's a hell of a lot packed into a short time here that I know that can take away and work with, and I'm sure other people will too. Yeah, I think the only other comment I wanted to make was that to me it feels like a veil's been lifted with this virus, and that we're being shown a lot of things. We've been shown how vulnerable I'm being shown how vulnerable I am in the way I currently live my life. I'm being shown how vulnerable the system that I live in is, how vulnerable my business is, how vulnerable my community is, how vulnerable there's vulnerabilities all over the place which are being exposed, which I think is part of what the fear is for me, is seeing the vulnerability that exists that maybe wasn't as clear before.
Yeah. Which then, if I had to just add on maybe the final thought onto that, is because we are story making machines as human beings. We coexist as humans different to all other animals because we can make story, because we create myth, belief. The greatest opportunity of our time right now is to stare into the fire and the face of these beliefs, these myths that we've been brought up on, indoctrinated into unconsciously, consciously, brainwashed in some ways, and then really look at that and say, right, so what of that works for me and do I take on into the world and build on? And then what of that doesn't work for me? Like a lot of the myths that we live, they're not useful. So do I have enough courage? And I speak for myself. I have enough courage to look at that. So what does that then mean for how I meet with and engage with other people when I meet them? And that comes back to the vulnerability and the fragility, willingness to meet people where we are as human beings, all being vulnerable, fragile, and here to connect and become more real, human, vulnerable, humble, and loving beings that are part of this experience, versus the other option, which is another story, which, for me, it's just not a story I really want to spend time on unnecessarily, which is to be afraid of things, to pull away, to disengage, to let others make decisions for me, to let others think for me. It's just not a narrative that works for me. And that requires then a courage for me or for anybody else to say, well, what is the story that I do want to live into? And if I have that courage, well, then I better write that story, because other people have plenty of courage to write it for me, because then I'm going to be a mechanism or a little worker bee in their world. If I have the courage to write my own story, I get to write stories with other people. I get to write stories that change the world. And I think that's what I think is possible for us now, is to see that much more magnified and amplified in our world. And do I step towards that, or do I pull away? And each one of us will do whatever we need to do in our dance. And for me, some days I do pull away and I'd like to pull away, but mostly my choice and my preference, step in and dance, get into that story and be part of creating the story I want for myself and for the world.
I think that's a perfect way to wrap it.
Yeah. Cool.
Thanks, Gab. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I really appreciate the time that you've spent with me.
Yeah, totally. And Lee, firstly, I mean, I've really found the conversation really energizing, and really appreciate you reaching out when we chatted the other day, just to connect, to say, hey, let's do a podcast. And the privilege of being a bookend is that I can also appreciate the quality, and I've obviously listened to quite a few of the other podcasts which I've shared with you, the quality of your attention, your listening, your questions, your ease, your comfort. I know this is a new platform that you're doing it on, but it comes across very smooth. So it's been like really cool for me to be in the first podcast, and now whatever, close to 100, whatever it is, and be on the receiving end of your growth and your maturing and your real excellence that's emerging as a podcast host. It's much harder than I think people have any, and even that I don't have any idea what it is, but I think most people just don't have an idea of how much goes in behind the scenes. I just want to honor the incredible work that you're doing and what you've built over this time, which is like 7-8 months, right? Which is amazing in and of itself, right? No, it's
a year. It's a year and 7-8 months. Yeah.
Yeah. I forgot the fact that I left. Yeah, I said I left a year and 7 months. So yeah. So well done, man. It's I've really enjoyed. So thanks for the time, man.
Awesome. Thanks, Gav.